it's a profession where you can grow your whole life, I think. You never get done, and you always find new aspects and fields that you can dive into and study. That, of course, makes it to something, the more you know that you don't know about, so to speak.
Hi and welcome to the newest episode of the Landscape Architecture series at Urbcast. And today I have a huge honor and pleasure to talk to Jens Linnet, who is the co-founder of a landscape architecture office called Bogl. Bogl is based in Copenhagen and is very known for plenty of landscape architecture projects, parks, etc. And today I will be discussing with Jens his journey through landscape architecture, how he became a landscape architect, how did he co-found his landscape architecture office, but also what is landscape architecture to him, how is Bogl measuring the impact of their projects. Actually, we'll discuss also about the nature and industrial developments in Sweden and how should the architecture offices or landscape architecture offices be approaching projects in the countries they are located, but also outside of their own playground, so to say. I think that was a very inspiring discussion, and I hope that you will enjoy listening to it. I wanted to say hello and hi Jens, welcome to Urbcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for seeing me. Yep.
I'm very happy that you joined this series that I created some time ago about landscape architecture, because that was something that I really wanted to talk about in my podcast, which is mostly about urbanism and architecture and cities. And I think that landscape was not overlooked, but a very missing part. I just wanted to talk more about that. And you as, I think, a very important figure if it comes to landscape architecture as a profession, especially in Copenhagen or in Denmark. I think you can bring to this discussion a lot. So that's why I'm very excited that I can talk to you. And I think that a good starting point would be to discuss a bit about your own career and your own progression as a landscape architect. I'm especially curious about how did you choose, or did you even choose to be a landscape architect, or maybe it was something that just came?
Yeah, it's a question that actually comes quite often. There's different ways to answer this one. I think landscape passion has been always in my life in some way, because I grew up in Sweden in the forest, and I had some parents, that brought me out seeing things, traveling and experiencing people and landscapes and the environment. We're interested in the environment around us. And so I think in that way, that's always been important. Also, my mother, we always looked at people, how they were socially engaging with the world. But when I was at the age to choose a profession, I wanted to be an actor, actually.
Okay.
And that was, I moved to Copenhagen. I applied for acting school. I didn't speak Danish, so I think it was a long shot, and there was 700 applicants for 12 seats.
All right, that's a lot.
So I didn't get it, and I thought, okay, then I can come back next year, so I have to learn Danish. I have to be better prepared. But I didn't want to waste my time, and talked with my parents, and they were actually the one who said, okay, but you always been creative, interesting in designing, and you like nature, and I mean, maybe this landscape architect will be something for you. And I didn't know it at all what it was. I had looked at architecture as something that could be interesting. So I sent an application, I got in, and I think after 1 month, I totally forgot everything about acting, because I was totally hooked and been ever since.
So that was not planned at all, actually. And that's similar to the previous guest of the series, Jakob Sanderson from Schönher. He also said that he wasn't thinking about landscape architecture. So what do you think, is this thing that is so captivating in landscape architecture? Once you start thinking about it, and once you start diving into I guess back then it was the school, the studies that you started, but then you also work as a landscape architect before creating your own practice. What made you?
I think it's a profession where you can grow your whole life, I think. You never get done, and you always find new aspects and fields that you can dive into and study. And that, of course, makes it to something, the more you know that you don't know about, so to speak. So I think that's one aspect for it. It's really a broad thing. And I think also this recent year is also a profession where you actually feel that you can make a change. I think that becomes more and more important, for me at least, where you work with biodiversity, you work with climate change, you can work with recycling and invent ways to work with materiality. And it's also a super social aspect. Everything we work with is the space that is common to all of us. So it's also a way to say that we have a responsibility to give something to next generation through our field. It's where people grow up. It's where your grandma grew up. It's, our memory and our relation to space can be quite emotional as well. So I think in that way, there is a lot of aspects that at least appeals to me.
Would you say that this is then something that can be used as a tool for sharing and spreading and emphasizing democracy, or is it a bit too much?
No, for sure. I think democracy is a broad suspect, a broad field, but I think the whole idea of living together, that's democracy, right? Making it accessible for everyone, finding ways to use our cities. And I think cities are both sustainable and the base for democracy, right? So definitely.
And how did you learn to be a landscape architect? You also said that you learned the whole life, but of course you had to start somewhere. Was it at school or the opposite?
I think I had different stages. I started at the University of Copenhagen, that was quite scientific. So I learned the base such as botanics and drawing and all those. Then I went to Versailles to study. That was a more artistic approach to it, to deal with more as an art field. And then after that, I had a lot of experience in both being abroad, working as a volunteer in Borneo, and I worked at different offices. Also had a year at Louisiana doing exhibitions. So I think all those experiences, both at professional offices and maybe especially when I landed at Vandkunsten together with Sven Algren, I think there was a good learning through being a professional in the beginning as well.
But finally, at some point, the moment came when you decided to open or co-start your own practice together with Adam Bank, the other founder. And I remember seeing somewhere you created a video from your trip. And I think that's where you also used your actor skills.
Maybe.
Or maybe that was this connection to the film school. Can you say something more about that? So how did you start the practice through some sort of exploration?
It's something that actually was quite important for us, I think, because when we studied, this was from late 90s through the beginning of the new millennium. There was a lot of focus on everything else than Scandinavia, a very opposite through recent years. So we were, going to Barcelona and Paris and knew more about what happened, in the Europe and in the States and other places than we actually knew about Scandinavia. And neither me or Adam had been higher up than Stockholm, I think, at the time, or something like that. So we felt that Scandinavia was this broad land that we didn't know very much about, even though we came from here. So I think we said, okay, when we finished the study, we need to educate and understand what we're coming from. We also understood that we had to do it in a way that was more living than photographing. So we decided to do a film. And this was when you had the first digital film camera, so it made it a little bit cheaper. We decided to drive from the south of Scandinavia up to the very north, to Nordkap. And we had to have some kind of guideline how we went. And we both had this passion for large industries in the landscape, where the scale is so big, so it kind of becomes an industry that more talks about the scale of a mountain or a forest or a river than human beings. We went down and we kind of mapped out the most interesting or largest natural resource industries in Scandinavia. Industries that are so big that they're also changing the landscape itself. We had that film with the industries, and then we had the film where we were filming from the car, how the landscape actually changed throughout Scandinavia. But we thought there was missing something. So we made a triptych, 3 films parallel to put up, and the large film was the people we met. Spontaneous people that could, anchor these industries and the road and the landscape on specific places. And I think when we came back, that was what had made the biggest impression on us. It was all these meetings and interviews with different people living in rural areas of Scandinavia. So I think it's always been this, the film gave us was how you look at nature and culture, because that's what it was When you put a road in a landscape, it's already there. It's a nature and culture. But the industries are also something that using the resources to produce something else. So it's also this connection between nature. Without nature, there's no industry, and the industry is using the nature. So it was a lot of aspect of that, and also how we human beings are placed in that. Sometimes we just live in it. Sometimes we are living there because there is a job. There is a lot of social interaction. So I think a lot of these issues are still something that we deal with today.
I think it's interesting you mentioned this industry and landscape, the industrial landscape of Sweden, because many episodes ago, I was talking to a journalist from Sweden on this podcast who released a book called The Uglification of Sweden. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard about it.
Yeah, I heard it.
And he was talking a lot about how the big industry, the big logistic centers and the big shopping malls, how they start to erase the old tissue of the cities or the landscape, where some of the very well-preserved, beautiful trees would be chopped down to create a new logistics hub. I just wanted to relate and just discuss that this is, to me, like it feels like it's changing, like this connection between the industry and landscape that you said, like that there is nature and the landscape and they are kind of coexisting. One needs the other, maybe. But in this sense, I feel like nature is losing, especially in Sweden, which is such a beautiful country. I was living in Sweden for many years and I love the nature.
Definitely landscape is losing and has been losing for many, many years. And you can say a country like Denmark, there's not much resistance in the landscape. If we want, we can destroy it. And in Sweden, you have a little bit more resistance, but you can still, cut down the trees. But I hope at least with this climate change that it makes us aware that nature in some way hits back and we have to find a way to live and coexist with nature. Species are dying, we're getting flooded, droughts and so on. Hopefully this is going to make us more aware to be more living in dialogue rather than someone that kind of just superimposes on nature.
Nowadays, we of course talk a lot about the climate crisis, maybe even more of a climate catastrophe. We should be calling that. Air quotes celebrated Earth Overshoot Day in Denmark a couple of days ago, which means that Denmark used all the resources that it should use within a year in 70 days or something like that, which is not good. And when you talk about architecture as an architecture and construction industry, of course, like a huge amount of the carbon is coming from the construction and from architects. We often hear that architects might be the ones that will save or will try to save Earth, right? With buildings that are more sustainable and so on and so on. But my question is, isn't that actually that it's going to be landscape architects that have kind of a bigger weight to pull in this whole?
If we're going to save the planet, it's going to not be from one profession, it's going to be from a common, effort for doing that. But I really think that in landscape architecture, at least we have really a lot of the tools to understand and work with nature and the balance between nature and culture. So yes, in that aspect. But of course, our footprint, unless you're talking big bridges and tunnels and things like that, are very small compared to the built industry. So I think in that aspect, if you are a building architect and can lower your carbon footprint, that's going to make a large effect, of course. So I don't think you can put it up like that totally, even if I would like to answer yes on that question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is more complicated than that. I was wondering, how do you approach your clients when you talk about the urgency for some action?
We are really putting all the efforts in this. And I mean, internally in the office, we had said that basically now we're doing our project only using recycled materials. Of course, that's not always possible. And sometimes there is also other aspects that makes us forced to use new materials. But that's kind of the baseline. Only recycled materials and trying to work within landscape, then it would be things like biodiversity, social sustainability, but also mobility, trying to make it easier to walk and bicycle, of course, commute with public transport. It can be aspects of water and adaptation in terms of climate. And then it's the whole kind of resource aspect. Can we build things with a really low carbon footprint? Can we work with material that has to be transported little as possible? So I think there is a lot of things we can really do and work with. And I think what we're also trying is also to say that there is also an aesthetic to this. That's also what we do as architects. We work with beauty in some way, right? So I think for us, we're also trying to say that it also has to have an architectural quality, a spatial quality. It's not only a sustainable topic, it's also a social aesthetical topic. And that's what we're trying to really focus on combining.
And how would you measure that? Because, of course, using recycled materials is one way, and you can always say that this much of materials on the project were recycled. But when you work with some other project where you work with some parks, do you have some like measurements or some tools that you can use to have a number at the end and say that we improved, let's say, biodiversity, for example, or our project contributed in this and this sense to the larger picture?
It's a question that I agree on, but it also annoys me a little bit. We do more and more trying to make a baseline before. For example, for biodiversity, we're doing a park now. We ask the community to make a baseline before and after. But you can say, of course, this is a place where it's been completely building site. Today there is nothing. So it's very easy for us to make a success. And we're also doing LCA calculations, etc., to improve that. But I think it's also a lot of this is also common sense, right? And it's also to, make something that really fits and to the site, and that is something that feels really natural to go to it. But of course, there is both this aspect that you need some hardcore numbers. This is what we did, but that can also be statistics can be used in different ways. So I think we need to have both the kind of our professional architect, landscape architects, and our common sense, and also kind of document it with statistics.
I was wondering because in your case, I think you are fortunate enough to have like very interesting and powerful reference projects. So when you discuss with a client, potentially you can show this whole portfolio of interesting projects and how they influence the landscape and the community, and also in terms of numbers. We have a situation of some younger landscape architects who maybe are trying to get their first commissions. Maybe some of them, like you many years ago, back in 2009, I think, when you started Bogl, starting their own small practices, very ambitious practices, I guess. What would be like your advice to some of the younger people that, like you, would like to work with landscape architecture, ideally on their own terms, with their own small offices? What would be kind of your advice as someone who started his own office?
Passion is a good way to start. If you are passionate at what you do and you're curious, that's going to help you, because I think in these years there's a lot of offices that grow bigger and bigger and they buy each other and kind of become more and more professional in a way. That can be really good, and you can have task force making all the numbers, as you said before. That's a good thing. But you can also come a little bit in a distance to what you do as an art field, at least. So I think what they should really use is that they are small and they have a direct communication with the client, and maybe that they can give something unique and something that is what they believe in, and try to find their way through that. And then, of course, there's always a way to go in and do competitions. That's getting harder and harder. There's fewer and fewer open competitions. But I think what we also did with success was we saw something that annoyed us, or we thought this can be done better. We made some drawings, took them under the arm, went to the client and say, hey, we're thinking you can do this much better. Look at this. What do you think? And that got us actually some projects in the beginning. And then we didn't have to do all the kind of, and I think maybe it was not our drawings that they bought. They bought us. They could see, okay, here are some people that are burning for something. They have, they want to change something. So maybe it was not that they took our drawings and designed that, but they said, okay, give us a shot, help us out. What should we do differently? And I think that's a way to start.
Were you starting in Denmark, or were you looking for projects abroad in different countries? Did you have any boundaries for where to look?
We always, since we made the film, we always consider ourselves as a Scandinavian office. So I think we always had looked for projects all over Scandinavia. But of course, we live here and we started here and we know the rules in Denmark. So we have most of our projects in Denmark, so far at least. So, and it was also, something physical that you could go on meetings on your bike and you don't have to transport yourself. This was also before Teams. So yes, in the beginning it was very focused on Copenhagen and Denmark. Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. But over the years, as far as I know, you also did some project outside of Denmark. outside of Sweden as well. You've been also doing some projects in Norway, and I think a couple of them in other places. Like, do you have an idea about the landscape architecture market? So basically, do you think that the projects that could be done here in Scandinavia are way more progressive than they could be done in different countries?
We are starting to do more and more abroad and getting more and more lectures around. So I think definitely in the future we want to also do projects in different parts of the world. I think for us the most important is that we have an ambitious client that can be ambitious together with us. We're not going to be an office that, doing 1,000 square meters of housing areas just for the sake of the money.
I was wondering if you think that because of, I would say that Denmark or Danish society is...
if it's more progressive here.
It's quite ambitious in terms of sustainability and so on.
I think the architecture community in Denmark is quite strong. I heard a podcast about Silicon Valley once, and they talked about how all these small startup companies started with Microsoft and Apple and all what it was. And they, started to change employees that went from one business to the other. And it was kind of these novelists that just grow and they inspired each other and they competed with the others. And that lifted the whole kind of IT commercial sector over there. And I think in one way, I can see some similarities in Copenhagen, especially where you have there was a lot of young offices, especially after the financial crisis as ours and a lot of others known.
Exactly in 2009, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, in these years. Yeah. And you can see a lot of the offices are from around those years. That there is so many young offices that are pushing the office. Of course, that gives a lot of innovation and you're trying to improve and you have a hard competition. There's a lot of architecture on a small surface. So I think there's been a momentum, of course, for Denmark and architecture and landscape in that sense. If we are better than others, I won't say I can find really good architects in any country I visit. But there is, of course, maybe also in the society, accept and respect of architecture and design in Denmark more than in most countries, I would say. That you have a will of well-designed. And I think that's also based in that it's a small country and it's a quite high population. Compared to Sweden, for example, there is a lot higher density. So you need to think more about every square meter here than, as you said before, in Sweden, you can cut down some trees and put anything in the forest. No one would care, right? In Denmark, it's not like that. You would always be seen by someone. So you have to be more careful what you do. I think there is something in that makes Denmark a little special, maybe together with Holland and some other, dense European countries. And I think you should be very careful when we move abroad during projects. We made a project in Cuba, for example, which was a bit crazy. But I think
that's a long shot.
Yeah, that was a long shot, but it was a really interesting topic. So it was an open competition. And I think you can go there, but you have to also be humble. You have to really try to understand the site and the people and the local context to do that. I think for us, it's not about putting kind of some Bogl stamp wherever we go. So hopefully when you look at our portfolio, you would see that every project is quite different. So there's not a kind of Bogl way. Then, of course, we have some preferences and aesthetics that you would see a red line throughout the project. We want it to be social and have some sustainability goals. But other than that, I think we hopefully can do local project in other countries as well.
By the way, I think you won this Cuba project.
Yes,
if I remember correctly. So, that was a good gamble and you managed to win. But great. I feel like this is a great segue to the next section that I would like to talk about, which is the components of a successful landscape project. Because my question about working abroad versus working in Denmark or in Scandinavia was also about when you work in Denmark as a Danish office, you're very well positioned to know the context. You can visit the site. As you said, some time ago, there was no Teams and you could just jump on your bike and visit the site. You are able to get to know it a lot. You really can dive into the site and get to know the society and the community and the clients and everything. When would you go and do a project in Cuba? It's very hard to do it, especially if it's like a shorter competition. You probably wouldn't just fly there and spend some time. So do you think, is it possible to make equally good project both while visiting the site and also while not doing it?
We made competitions where we didn't see the site and they've been really good projects of that. I think like the passage in Tisted, I think that was during Corona. We were sitting on teams developing that. But I think, as I said before, it still has to be in a manner where you really try to build the product from down below and up, and not try to superpose a product from above, if you understand what I mean with that. And I think you can do that in any context. I think sometimes, for example, in the Cuba project and also other projects, there can be a slight advantage not knowing the site too much, because you can also come with some fresh eyes looking at what they come from and what their culture is, and kind of, remember them. These things that you have here are actually quite unique. You should care for them. You should embrace them. And I think that happens a lot, where you see different places where they have something unique, but they don't care for it. So I think maybe sometimes it's also an advantage coming from outside.
Do you think that might be why sometimes you have a big project and then there is an outsider winning that? Like it was the same with DAC, with the Danish Architecture Center. It was won by a Dutch company.
Yeah.
And there is plenty of amazing architects in Denmark. None of them won the Danish Architecture Center building. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. When you put it like that, of course. But I think it's nice that there is also the last maybe 10, 15 years are also not only Danish architects working in Denmark. There's been a long time where it was quite difficult to enter Denmark, I think. A little bit protective in this way, but now a lot of architects from the outside has also made some projects. And I think it also adds to this, a new way to look at ourselves. And sometimes these projects are really criticized, at least in the beginning, but they also become part of the city in some way. And I think we learn from them. And I mean, DAC has been very discussed, as you probably know.
Yes.
But I think there is some way of thinking how you can combine different functions, and that has been brought further into a lot of other projects in Denmark after that. So whether you like it or not, it has had an impact, I think.
Again, if it comes to the industry, especially the one with landscape architecture projects, don't you think that the market is getting saturated now? Because there are a lot of great practices working primarily with landscape architecture as yours. And when some of them, they work primarily in Scandinavia or Denmark, which we already discussed is quite a small land. And when you see the development over the years, maybe last decade, do you feel that there are like maybe less and less projects, or maybe there are new types of projects, or how this market is looking in your eyes?
I think for landscape architects, it's been a crazy journey since I started. I started to study in 1997, where landscape architect was not really respected very much. I think the landscape architect to come and put 3 trees and make a little bit green in the corners. Didn't really ask for a landscape architect's opinion. Of course, there's been some really good classical landscape architects in Denmark, like C.T. Sørensen, etc. But I think the profession has now a lot more say in the discussion. And I think also what happened, and I was lecturing yesterday in Lund, and I think when the students came up and they said, "Also, are you a landscape architect or architect?" Because they thought that, it's kind of they thought it was not really clear. We're also doing pavilions, and we're doing master planning, and we're doing landscape, and what are you actually? And I said, maybe it's not so important. Maybe the boundaries are not so important anymore. And I think there's a lot of good building architecture practices in Denmark. They also do landscape and vice versa. So I think I like that, so sharp put up. But I think when you ask, we only experience that there is more and more job for us, because you both have all the coastal protections, and there is those who open with the open land, they have a lot of energy and forest projects, and you have traffic and mobility. As I said before, you have biodiversity, you have the social aspects. There is so many fields that are much more political in focus now than it was 20 years ago. And hopefully, I think it's also subjects that hopefully makes us in more relationship with our surroundings, both in the cities and outside. So I think hopefully that's for the good.
And do you see any new trends emerging? You already said we should look kind of beyond only like landscape and public space, but we are discussing mobility, we are discussing how we are moving around and other things. Recently, there is some discussion about the biodiversity net gain, where you basically try to provide as many or ideally more greenery or trees or vegetation as there were on the site. Is that something that you see being more and more important, or there are maybe some other trends that you would say will play a bigger role?
I think in terms of biodiversity, there's also been a lot of greenwashing. You can never ever say that you can have the same biodiversity in a city as you can in a natural environment where you have the scale and you have outside the cities. But when that is said, I think the landscape and the nature in the cities has a lot of other aspects. It's corridors for habitats that can bind the bigger green areas together, and you have a lot of potential working also for human beings, helping with stress and reducing the heat in cities. So I think it's more complex than that. So I think working with landscape in the cities is not only about biodiversity, because then I think you could invest those money better other places. It's one of many important things. Yeah.
Greenwashing. Oh my God, that's let's not open up this box of worms, because I think we would need another episode for that.
Yeah, for sure.
But maybe to stick a bit around this topic, what are some things that you perceive the biggest challenges in your profession? Some obstacles that maybe you meet daily and you wish they were gone, or you're actively fighting against them?
I feel like saying cars, traffic, parking. We don't have a product where that's not an issue. And I think it's also always a fight about space, right? And that's also said that we have, cities are dense and they should be, but that also means that you have a lot of things that need to compete with each other. Should you prioritize accessibility, or more trees, or more parking, or wider bicycle tracks, or more places to sit and play? There is a lot of things that you want to use the public space for, and there's a lot of things going on the ground. And we also now, with the war in Russia, we are making more fjärrvärme, what is that called in new heating systems in the ground.
Systems, yeah.
And all of these things are kind of trying to compete about the same space, right? So city planning it's complicated, and it's a lot of compromises.
I remember seeing some very nice photos of Copenhagen with the bikes being stacked against the wall, and in some colorful district, maybe in Christianshavn, and people were loving it, people were enjoying it. But then when I started to live in Copenhagen, I realized that often the bikes are just being stuck against the wall because there's no space for them in any other places, because there are a lot of cars. And I was like, okay, maybe it's not that idyllic anymore. It's not that amazing that the bikes are there, and there's basically the lack of space. And I think that's a very crucial battle for space in the city. Do you feel like you have the power through the projects to try and change that, or influence at least?
I think we do. In every project, we are pushing for more space for pedestrian and bicycle. And I don't think it's not a single project where there's not a reduction of space for cars, but it goes slowly. Of course, you have to take it a little bit step by step. And I think it's Yaya who's made this analysis that, I don't remember the numbers, but the cars are taking, 60 or some percentage of the city, right? But they only maybe 20 or 25% or something like that are using the cars. So it's not really democratic in that way. Whereas as a bicycles in Copenhagen, it's maybe 50 or 60% who uses that, but we only have maybe, a small part of the percentage of the space. So I think your question about that, that's going to be more and more urgent, of course, to deal with that.
Do you have your favorite project, or it's the one that is not done yet?
Among our projects?
Yes.
It's very difficult to answer. I think it's all, I think it was Björgo said, it's like your own children. It's hard to pick. And I have it a little bit in the same way. I think every project, and the history behind, there's things that you think went very well, but there's always things that you think could have become better. So I can't pick one project, but I have a number of projects that I think in their unique aspect are successful, of course. So you want me to mention some projects, or?
Yeah, if you would like to, for example, I really love Chemiseparken.
That would definitely be one. And I think one of the reasons is also kind of early project for us. So it also been a project that opened a lot of doors, ways to, had been a good reference that has made us do a lot of other public spaces. And I think it's I go there often to show people around, and it works. It feels really natural, and it's used, and it's well maintained. So it seems like it's quite robust, and I think it's definitely also one of my favorites.
That's good to hear. Of course, I will not force you more to pick among your own children, as you said. Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to know how it is like when you're working with so many projects. And you are basically responsible for all of them, right? You are, as one of the founding partners of Bogl, you have to kind of own them. So I was wondering, how does it feel to have a successful project, or maybe not successful project?
Yeah, but it's the reason why it's always difficult to answer is also because, as I said before, we're always learning so much new. I mean, when you look at the Miespark, and I think it's a really good product, but today I would be really hesitant using concrete. Just a thing like that, at that time we didn't think of that. Then it was more the functionality and the aesthetics and the other aspects that made that a good choice.
You mean the concrete path?
Yeah, just a simple thing, but it's not, concrete would be on a sustainable matter. Then we would work differently one day. So I think it's also a little bit, you have to look at the time and space and the context that you work in. And I think a project like Tisted, I really like, where we managed to, that was a competition, and in the brief, they wanted us to tear down all the buildings to make a big square, and we did the opposite. We said, let's keep everything and make, a small scale, keep the backside of the city, with this old small houses that have been there originally, and that shows some of that history. But it also creates a city with these a lot of small rooms that has a good microclimate that fits good to that space, and that was maybe a little bit before the transformation trends that is coming now that we made that. So I think that's a product I'm really proud about as well.
I've been there myself in Tistel, and I really enjoyed the project as well, although it was very brave of you to challenge the brief and do the opposite. But it worked.
It worked, and I can tell you, since we're not building architects, I think there was a lot of things in the competition that we didn't know about the rules of firewalls, etc. So I think sometimes maybe it's good to be a little bit naive, because then you choose the right solution, even though it's an impossible solution. But it's like a humblebee; it flies, although it shouldn't.
Yeah, we have a similar saying, a joke in Polish, where something is impossible, and then some Polish people come and they fix it because they didn't know it was impossible. So I think that's a very good rule. All right, Jens, I think to summarize this discussion, I also wanted to kind of make the full circle, and we start with talking about your own career and starting as a landscape architect. We've also mentioned starting your own studio. At the end, I would like you to ask for some advice for young students, for young landscape architects, for some people who might also struggle with finding the right thing they want to pursue as a landscape architect, or maybe also struggle with finding a job. What would be your advice to learn more and to be more and more successful as a landscape architect with time?
You should keep being curious, keep investigating, and keep being observant about your surroundings. I think that's the whole curiosity aspect. Once you stop being curious, you might as well stop as a landscape architect. So if you can keep that drive and that kind of need to learn more and investigate and develop, and that could be, then it depends a little bit what you're into. If it's more the design part, or you can also be nerdy about plants, or it could be materiality or techniques in construction. I think, that doesn't really matter. That could be all of those things. If you're sitting in a municipality and doing regulations, or if you're doing master planning, or if you're do detailing at an office. But I think always trying to kind of ask questions, and try to, that's also a way to follow with time, and time changes, and the way of looking at things changes. And I think that's also how we improve society, hopefully, for a better place.
What I also learned from you is that landscape architecture is not about one thing, it's about many different things. And also that maybe we shouldn't be very picky and distinguishing that much between architects, landscape architects, and urban designers and so on, but think about it as a kind of one whole working together. One more thing is a book recommendation. If you would like to recommend something that could be useful, especially for landscape architects, not necessarily, but maybe you would have something that you could share. Probably more than one.
Yeah, there is a lot of books, but I think if you are a student or a young landscape architect, there is one book you should read that is called The Bygninger and Landscape by Sven Ingvar Andersson. It's a Swede. He was a professor.
Buildings and landscapes.
It's super short and easy, but it's really spot on. I think there's a lot of things in composition and design that kind of find its fundament. And it's so banal, it's so logic, but sometimes the really truth comes out of something really simple as well. If you haven't read that one, that would be at least one of the recommendations.
Thanks. Have you read yourself as a young architect?
Yeah, I did it when I studied, yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jens, for the recommendation and for this meeting. I think that was really amazing to have your voice as a part of this landscape architecture series in Urbcast. And also thanks for all the recommendations for especially younger people, because I've already got some great feedback from them that they find it very useful. So yeah, thanks for contributing.
Thanks for hearing and talking with me. That was nice.
And that was it for today. Thank you for listening to the newest episode of the Landscape Architecture series in Urbcast. You will find some of the links in the description of the episode, and I will talk to you soon in another episode of Urbcast in 2 weeks. Take care.